friends. Welcome to the Mini Dairy Goat podcast. All things miniature dairy goat. Not too big, not too small, just right. I'm your host, Carrie O'Neill. Join me as I guide you through the enchanting and addicting world of miniature dairy goats. Hello, goat friends. It's Carrie back with the Mini Dairy Goat podcast. We've got a great episode planned for you guys today. My guest is Eliya Elmquist from Green Gables. If y'all are into the Mini Nubians, you definitely know this name. So I am proud to have her on. And I've asked her to not only come on to this episode, but also to come back for some more episodes. Because as you guys are going to see here, it's going to be a wealth of knowledge. So Eliya, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm very happy to be here. And I'm glad you reached out to me and glad that I can be here. So we first started with goats when I was 10. My dad was very excited to move into the country and start homesteading, and he looked up a lot of different breeds, and we decided to start with Nigerian dwarfs since that was kind of the small option back then. This was in 1997. And so we had Nigerian dwarfs first, and eventually he heard somehow about, they were called dwarf Nubians at the time, or at least that's how he heard of them. So we got a full-size Nubian and had our first mini Nubians born in 99. So just 2 years after we started. And then we just kind of kept going with both breeds and ended up getting more into the mini Nubians and switching to just mini Nubians sold out of the Nigerians in 2004. So that's kind of how we got going, and we can talk a little bit later about all those reasons of why we decided to just do the mini Nubians.
Yeah, so exciting. So a couple years here, you'll be on your 20th anniversary for Mini Nubians. So the topic and what we're going to really get into today, and we're going to have a series of these topics for you guys, but we're going to call it breed origins. And today's topic, our breed, is going to be the Mini Nubian. But I'd like to do breed origin episodes for all of our miniature dairy goats and really talk about to different breeders and why they chose that particular breed. And again, today our focus is the Mini Nubian. So as we've discussed in previous episodes, a Mini Nubian is a blending of Nigerian dwarf and a standard Nubian. So one of the things I thought we'd do is go over kind of the history of Nubians. We are going to have an episode on Nigerian dwarfs, but right now we'll talk about just the standard breed and the history of Nubians. So, Eliya, what do you want to share anything about what you know about the history of Nubians?
Oh, there's a lot out there. I guess the main thing is that they came here from Europe originally, and we were talking about that before we got started here on exactly which country. There's a little bit of difference of opinion out there, I guess. But I think the main draw for them was those beautiful big ears and the high butter fat and all of that. So it's fun to see where they've come. I've seen a lot of pictures of the older Nubians and seeing how much they've changed.
Oh yeah, I was doing
back then is really amazing.
Yes, doing some research here, and I'm like, oh god, that showed some pictures of some bucks, and they're like, oh, whoa, that doesn't look good by today's standards. But yeah, so
right, like what is that thing?
Yeah, like whoa, a little weak in the chine there. But they used to be called Anglo Nubians. So then they came over. It was a cross with the Old English milch goat, and then a breed of goat called Zareba and Nubian bucks, which were imported from India, Russia, and Egypt. And so England really got on board and then developed the Anglo-Nubian. And then here in the United States, they dropped the Anglo and we just call them Nubians. But like you mentioned, they have that distinctive breed characteristic, which really separates them apart from all the different I guess you would say, Swiss breeds with the pointy ears. So these guys, of course, have the long pendulous ears, have the strong Roman nose, so that convex nose. Um, let's see, what else can we talk about? They also, so one of the reasons they have those long ears is because they can live in those really hot climates, and those ears help dissipate that heat. So that's good as well. Um,
Right.
so you mentioned the butter fat on these guys. They do have one of the higher yielding butter fat. Um, so just kind of all in all, I think the Nubian is a great breed, and of course we're going to talk today about the mini Nubian. I did some other research, and it looked like they were brought over to the States back in the early 1900s. But maybe we can do a follow-up episode on how the Nubians have, once they joined ADGA, how they've progressed in some of the different herds over the years. That would be a fun episode to do as well. So we'll share. So that's
Sounds
kind of a
good.
little history. And so they're big, right? They're one of the bigger goats as far as the standard size. A lot of the
Right.
does. The bucks are very large, and then the for the show ring, it seems to be. We talked about that in the last episode with Pat and Jeannie, but the stature, they've been building them bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's one of the keys, of course, why we're doing a miniature dairy goat podcast, because we like them a little,
Right.
not too big, not too small, just right. So
Yep. The Goldilocks goats.
yes, yes. So why? So you had the Nigerians, you got into them to the, you got your Nubian doe, and then you got into the mini Nubians. Just tell us more about almost 20 years of being into it, kind of what you guys have done with your herd over the years.
Sure. Well, the number one reason we got goats in the first place was for their milk. We had a fair amount of lactose intolerance in our family, and besides that, nobody wanted to have a big cow. So that's why we got them. And we felt that the mini Nubians were a whole lot easier to milk than the Nigerian dwarfs. That was probably one of the biggest reasons. Can we pause?
Sure. Hold on one second.
Okay, because my baby.
All right. Sorry about that interruption. We are, of course, living on our farms and doing what we need to do. So there might be some kid disruption, some dog disruption. So we just roll with it. So we were talking about why mini Nubians.
Okay, yes. So we were talking about the milk as the number one reason we got into goats. And switching from Nigerians to the mini Nubians because they were much easier to milk with larger teats, and they're easier to get on the stand than a Nubian. If a 200-pound Nubian doesn't want to get onto the stand, there's not a whole lot I can do about it. But
Yeah.
with the mini Nubians, it's a lot easier to convince them that they should go on the stand without breaking my back. And we found that they had a lot better volume of milk than the Nigerians, giving pretty much, honestly, they were giving as much as the Nubian that we had. So it's kind of like, they're giving as much as the Nubian, and they're a lot smaller, they're eating less. Why have a big Nubian?
Yep.
So they don't, on average, I would say they give a little less than a Nubian, but it kind of depends on the bloodlines. We've had, I would say our average is like between 4 and 8 pounds, depending on at what point in lactation and how old they are and all of that, with maybe like a 5-pound average over the course of the year.
Yeah, and for our
For a
listener,
mature door. So
yeah, so one of the things when you get into goats, you start talking about pounds of milk. And so for anyone wondering how many pounds make a gallon, it would be about 8 pounds per gallon, correct?
right. So the most we've ever had from one doe in a 24-hour period was 14 pounds, which is just a little bit under 2 gallons, which is quite crazy.
Wow, yeah. One of the things that I know you guys do a lot of milk testing in your herd. We're going to have a whole other episode about that. But that's one of the ways that you can really track of course, the production and how well you're doing there with your breeding program. But we'll talk about that later. But go on, go on. I interrupted you. I
Yeah.
interrupted you.
No, that's fine. So we have, like you said, the milk testing, which also tells us the butter fat, which is really, really good in the mini Nubians, because the Nigerians have even higher butter fat than the standard Nubians. So when you combine the two breeds, you get really good butter fat.
Yep.
So I'd say probably average, we have 4.5 to 5% butter fat. Some are a lot higher, some are lower. So just over the herd, it's about that. I think the highest butter fat we had was like 9.7 or something towards the end of lactation. So it's fun to.
That's what I was going to ask. Now, I was going to say. Now, I know I'm thinking this is right, but the further lactation, further along you are, the higher the butter fat usually is.
Yeah, that's generally true. I kind of think of it as they have the same amount of fat that they produce in their milk each day, and it just the water content goes down over the year. Because you're usually, getting less milk towards the end of the year, but it's a lot more concentrated. So, but it makes some of the most incredible cheese. So that's one thing we really enjoy with them is.
And you guys,
really yummy
you guys
cheese.
Hand milk, don't you?
Yes, we do.
Yeah. So how many? I'm sorry, I'm just all curious, and so hopefully. But how many does do you guys typically milk on average?
We usually freshen about 20 to 22 each year.
Okay.
Right now we're down to 15 milking, and then we have 22 bred for spring. So, well, it will be 22 once we're done with breeding.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So with the Nigerians, you guys were trying to hand milk those, and so then of course when you switched over to the mini Nubians, is teat size something that you focus on, or you've just got that's good in your lines no matter from.
Well, the teat size was definitely a huge difference between the Nigerians and the mini Nubians that we had. I mean, I know with each breed it greatly depends on breeding and selection, but generally a Nubian is going to have bigger teats than a Nigerian just based on body size, and so the mini Nubians had a lot better, easier teats. But we do purposely select for orifice size so that the milk flows nice and easy, as well as teat size that are easy for hand milking.
So you guys obviously drink a lot of the milk, and then you're making cheese. Are y'all doing anything else fun with the milk at your farm?
We raise a couple calves. Sometimes we'll have some hogs. Of course, feeding all the baby goats until they're sold or weaned. And then we have a large family, so we use a lot of milk.
And it's so tasty that everyone who, I'm sure you guys all the time, I mean, I think anyone who raises goats and any of the listeners, people, like your, non-goat friends are like, oh, goat milk, that's gross. They just have some preconceived notion of it. And then it's like, oh no, you're coming right now. You're like, you're going to try some, and you pour them a glass and they're like, oh my gosh, that's really good.
Yes, we have won over so many people, even people who've had goat's milk from a farm before. They try our milk and they're just in awe. They're like, this is so good. How can it doesn't taste that much different than, fresh cow milk. And I personally think it's better, but whatever.
Well, you're up there in Wisconsin, and I kind of think of that as dairy capital of America. I don't know if that's the title of the state or not, but I mean, it seems like you would have a lot more I don't know, people just more knowledgeable about dairy stuff, and so it's interesting that you run into the same thing.
We do have a lot of dairy farms. We used to have a lot more, but the small dairy farms have pretty much all been squished out. There aren't too many left. I think our township used to have like 20 or 30 dairy farms in our little township, and now we have 0.
Oh wow!
So that's really a really sad thing to watch, but there are still some smaller smaller farms around.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a lot of Amish around us too, so there are a lot of Amish dairy farms, which
Mm-hmm.
are definitely smaller than than the big ones. We also do have one dairy farm just down the road that has the whole, robot robot milking machines, and everything's automated.
And is that a
It's
cow
pretty
dairy
crazy.
or a goat dairy?
Yeah, cow dairy.
Yeah.
Yep. Although goat dairies have really picked up in the state as well, because the goat milk market is a lot higher, I guess. So a lot of cattle farmers just jumped right into goat farming because it was more profitable, at least
Yeah, I
for a
would
while.
think,
I'm not sure what it
yeah,
looks like now, but
I would think it would be less of like a commodity because I mean, like when people can't drink cow milk, myself
hmm
included,
yeah,
you,
most of it is for cheese making here,
yeah,
though.
interesting.
It's mostly going. Besides that, the goat milk in the store is so nasty.
Oh, it's gross. It is so gross.
It's like if you're thinking about getting a goat and you want to try goat milk, don't try it from
Don't.
the store because you will never get a goat.
Yeah. You'll be like, nope, never doing
Um,
it. Well, back to the
right,
mini Nubian.
exactly.
So you're milking them. So what else is it that you guys enjoy about the mini Nubians?
Well, we mentioned a little bit about size. That's definitely a big factor. You know, those big Nubian does can, and especially the bucks, but even just looking at does can easily be 200 pounds and get quite tall. And so with a mini Nubian, they're kind of, I mean, again, it varies a bit, but 100, around 100 pounds, maybe a little more if you have a heavier animal. But that's a lot easier to move, a lot easier to trim hooves. Pretty much anything where you have to restrain them for something is a lot easier with them not being so large. And then, of course, they're not eating as much either.
Mm-hmm.
But we have, so for our goats, generally we have our mini Nubian does between 24 and a half and 26 and a half inches.
Mm-hmm.
And that's measured to the withers or the top of the shoulder. And the bucks generally 28 to 29 inches,
Yep.
what the average is here. Yeah, one of the things I was thinking about too is, I don't mind having my little children playing with the goats. I don't have to worry about them, getting hurt. And that kind of leads into the personality too. And I could, continue to trim the hooves even on my bucks when I was, 9 months pregnant. So
Mm-hmm.
they're just a lot easier to handle. But that also goes into my third point in it is the personality. They just have the most incredible personalities that I've ever seen. They're sweet, they're gentle, super friendly and loving. They're just, I don't know, really, really fun goats to be around. And then at one point that is it's kind of a funny point, but their Nigerian dwarfs are extremely smart, like too smart. They can get
Mm-hmm.
out of anything. They are really just, I don't know, too intelligent, I guess. And Nubians, one of the kind of stereotypes around the Nubians, standard Nubians is, quote unquote, dumb Nubian, because they're just kind of not as bright sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And the mini Nubians are, again, like the Goldilocks goats, not too smart, not too dumb. So I have a story from years ago when we had all three breeds. And the Nigerian dwarfs would figure out how to open the gate and let everybody out. And the mini Nubians would be, oh, good, the gate's open, and they'd walk out. And the Nubian would stand right next to the gate, looking through the fence, just wailing, "Moo, moo, let me out." That's just like, that is so typical of the three breeds, at least in my experience. It was pretty funny.
Okay, so I have to ask you another silly question. So I only have 10 does, but I can recognize all of their voices. So you have a
Mm.
larger herd. Can you recognize their voices?
Some of them, a lot of them don't talk enough that I necessarily notice them. I have a few that definitely it's like, oh, that sounds like Cammy, or that has to be Eclipse, But
Yeah.
not, like, for the most part, they don't call that much unless it's milking time, or I have a few that are loud when they're in heat. But I have one Eclipse who she's so funny. Her mat is so quiet and soft. It's just sometimes she'll open her mouth and no sound will come out. It's so
Yeah.
funny. Otherwise, it's just kind of this soft little la.
I call
Like,
the I
okay.
have two of them. They kind of
Mhm.
hum. They kind of hum. It's like,
Yeah.
and then like like okay, like they're kind of a little bit deeper pitched. So, but yeah, definitely agree with you on the personalities. So I do have two standard Nubians, and they are sweet, but yeah, sometimes it's just like, oh my gosh, like if you would just come right over here, you could get in this perfectly empty feeder where no one's even here, but then they just like cram
Right.
together and like, okay, there's like five open feeders you can eat at right here. So that's pretty funny. Well, one of the
Yeah.
things that, you are one of the renowned mini Nubian breeders in the country. And so I just wanted to kind of pick your brain. You have, let me ask. So in your herd right now, do you have goats that are not homebred that you brought in?
I currently only have one doe and one buck that are not.
Okay. Okay. So that's kind of so you're, as far as breeding goes, and the more I get into this, the more I learn, but these, the big standard, AGDA show herds and different things. I mean, they've been working on their herds for years and years and years, and they'll very rarely bring in, an outside buck maybe to do some outcrossing or
Mm-hmm.
things like that. But a lot of us just starting, you're just kind of like, you don't know what you don't know, and you get a goat from here, get a goat from here, get a goat from here. But you guys are to the point almost 20 years in to where you definitely have a type, I guess you could say, that you're breeding towards. So, what is
Mm-hmm.
it that is important to you when you're making those breeding decisions? What are your priorities, I guess, if that makes sense?
Well, I take it on an individual basis. So I write down all of the strengths and weaknesses of each doe and of each buck. And then I look at, each doe and say, which traits do I feel she needs improvement in? And then um, choose the buck that best, meets those characteristics.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's, I feel like she's a little weak over the top line, or maybe she has, udder attachments, or she needs a more extended fore udder, or whatever traits I'm looking for. I look for the buck that's most likely to hopefully improve those
Mm-hmm.
areas. Um, so it kind of just depends on the individual animal for me. So I
So that's
want the whole package.
Yeah, you're like, I want the perfect. I want it perfect. So without,
Exactly.
in the miniature dairy goats, we do not have I guess you could say, performance program or assessment program that is similar
Hmm.
to the AGDA linear appraisal program. And so, what is it? Do you keep track of that in your system? Like, okay, I used that buck on that doe, and it did improve in the the doelings or whatever. Are you tracking that, or
Somewhat.
do you, or
I
just
usually try to make notes if it was obvious. Some of the things, unfortunately, I can't keep track of because I can't keep all the kids.
yeah, yeah.
um, so I really appreciate the buyers that keep in touch with me and send me other pictures, and tell me when their goats from us earned their star, or I've had a number of bucks that have earned their plus, which is really exciting because they have to have so many daughters
Mm-hmm.
that have earned their star.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it helps me a lot when buyers give me feedback, because I can only keep, well, I try to limit myself to 4 in a year, but that hasn't happened for a while. It's usually been like 5 or 6. So
Yeah.
it's hard. Um, but that is one of the hard things, because in order to prove a buck out and know what he's doing, you have to keep enough daughters to see, what he's producing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's hard to do unless you have unlimited time and energy and money. So I don't think any of us have that.
No, it's definitely not a money making endeavor for most of us. So, well, that's really interesting because I mean, I know you're one of the few herds that kind of almost is to that point where your whole herd is pretty much almost, Green Gables. And so you're to the point to where you can really, make those decisions, and interesting. So,
It is
I,
fun though. I love watching all the new breeders and all of the new lines that are starting. But it is really fun when I'll see a goat advertised for sale, and I'm like, oh, I got to look at that pedigree. That has to go back to some of ours because it looks like a Green Gables goat. And then I look, and sure enough, it has
there,
either
yeah,
a parent or a grandparent that's from here. So it's fun to see that stamp carrying through.
yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing is, anytime anyone asks, hey, what are the best herd? There's, your name comes up, and then several other herds that are really trying to improve. But I think it's hard for new breeders, or not new breeders, but just new owners into the mini Nubian breed, to
Hmm.
really get that information as far as, when you're new to goats, it's a very, very steep learning curve. And we chatted before we got started, but one
Hmm.
of my future episode is ideas is just resources. Like, where do you go? How do you learn all this stuff? And so I
Hmm.
think that'll be good for new goat owners, because it is more important than just a flashy spotted goat. There's,
Right.
you need to
Well, and
have that.
sometimes it takes experience too, because,
Yep.
you can do all the book reading you want, but until you actually do it and learn by trying to milk a super short teated goat that gives you cramps and takes you an hour to milk her, that's when you realize, okay, so this actually is really important. I see why.
Yeah, or like you
But
said, orifice size. You're just like, I
yeah.
have a couple of my goats. It's like, just you could, poke someone's eye out with the stream you're getting from it. It's so strong. But then the other ones, you're just like, oh, okay, we need to improve on this. So,
Hmm.
well, what
Yep,
are
I have
your
one right now that has teats that are shorter than I like, but her orifice size is really good, and so it's not that hard to milk her, even though her teats are a little shorter than ideal. Um, I have a friend who had Sonnens, and I helped him milk for a while, and he had this one doe whose teats were so big, but the orifices were so small. It would take two hands around the teat, squeezing with like all my might to get the milk out. And I was like,
wow?
how do you do this? This is just painful. So that's definitely a priority for me. That and feet and legs. I don't like to see a goat walking down on their pasterns. It makes me hurt looking at it. It's like,
Yeah, you
ouch.
get you got to have strong feet and legs for that goat to hold up over time. Well, let's
Mhm.
so we've kind of hit a little on why mini Nubians. We've chatted about I'm a mini Nubian owner as well, so we've chatted about why they're so great, why we love them so much. Share with us, like, when you were getting in, so you did start, you had your Nubian doe and your Nigerian dwarf, and you kind of started your own lines there. Did you early on bring any outside goats from other herds, or just tell us a little bit about kind of that, I guess, kind of this part two to the history of
Mhm.
many Nubians, and how, and then, maybe walk us down that road to, kind of present day and the popularity, and just kind of your thoughts on that. I think we'd love to hear that.
Yeah. So we got our first mini Nubian buck. Um, we bought it. It's actually kind of a funny story because this was before I was driving. I was probably maybe 14 at the time, something like that. I'm not exactly sure on the dates here, but um, I had seen a buck advertised across the state, like halfway across the state, and um, my mom had a lot of health issues, so she didn't wasn't have been able to take me, and my dad was too busy, and so we had some friends who raised goats, and I asked them about if they would take me over to get this buck, and they agreed, and so we got in their van and we drove halfway across the state and met the family that owned him, and um, then went and looked at the buck, and I was like, oh boy, it was, I think, probably September, and for some reason I had been thinking it was a buckling. It was an adult buck. So we had a very fun 3-hour ride home. Buck in in the van with us. I felt so bad. I'm glad they were goat people and didn't mind, because not too many people would, and that it was an older van too. Anyway, it was quite the ride. But anyway, so that's Hershey, who had originally come from Pat Fountain's herd. I think he, if I remember correctly, he had gone from her out to a herd in California, and then to this herd in Wisconsin, and then I got him. So I had a little bit of travel. So he we had our first second generation kids from him. And I guess that was maybe around 2003, something like that.
Okay.
And then I had found Danette Hackman in her herd, Echo Hills, and was drooling over her goats for quite a few years, talking with her a bit and kind of trying to figure out how it was a dream of mine to have goats from her, and I don't know how many years I dreamt about that, but eventually we did fly a buck and doe pair in from her, and that really made a big difference in our herd. So those two, that was Jasper and Molly. We still have tons of their blood in our herd.
Mm-hmm.
And before them, we had purchased a goat from another Wisconsin farm called Charlie Brown. It's not the Echo Hills one. They have a Charlie Brown also. But this was Country Dreams Charlie Brown. And he was a blonde buck that did a lot of good things in our herd. And I ended up going back when his breeder was selling out. And I bought his aunt and two of his sisters, and I remember what else, a bunch from him. So we have a lot of that. That made a big impact in our herd also. So I think kind of each time that I branched out and brought in new blood, it was a really good thing that kind of steered the direction of our herd. When we were just starting, I didn't know anything about conformation. My dad knew maybe a little bit, but it was more just, homestead milker kind of a thing. And as we went along, we learned more, and I kind of had a natural eye for what I liked. Looking at Danette's herd and some of the other standard goat breeders' herds, and going to a fair too. I would help at the Northern Wisconsin State Fair every year with their show, and so I would watch the standard goats, of course, being judged, and learned a lot from doing that, and being the show secretary and whatever else they had me do. Mm-hmm. I mostly preferred when I could go along and help show other people's goats. That was fun, but that taught me a lot. So it was definitely a lot slower process than I think a lot of people getting into it today have more information at their fingertips and more learning opportunities, I guess I would say, than when we first started. It was kind of feeling our way along. But
yeah, now we've got the two registries, or the bigger two registries that are doing a lot with the confirmation clinics and virtual shows, and I think that's easy for new goat owners to participate in and to learn more about their goats that they have. So tell us a little bit. I mean, obviously, you've been in it, and I mean, I've been in it since, I guess, 20, like six years, so not that long. But I think the story goes, I can't drink cow's milk. I live in the country. I want to get some goats, and then you start looking, and for me at least, it was like, oh, mini Nubian, that sounds cool. Kind of like you're saying, the Goldilocks of goats, and so. When did you, or historically, I think, when did you see the popularity really take off and really see your farm kind of bloom into one of the premier breeders?
Yeah, well, we noticed pretty much right away whenever we were selling Nigerian kids. Everybody that came to the farm would see the mini Nubian kids and be like, oh, I want one of those, instead of the Nigerians. And that was one of the things that kind of pushed us towards choosing them over the Nigerians, because even our buyers liked them better, which at that point we didn't have any to sell. But they always wanted the ones we were keeping. So that kind of helped us go that way. And then probably, I think what year that would have been. Probably around maybe 2000, probably to around 2006 or 4, somewhere in there. We had more, no, it's probably later than that. But anyhow, whenever it was, I can't remember the exact year, but we were building a house maybe an hour from where we lived, and the place that we started our farm, the house had Green Gables, and so that's how we got the farm name. So when we were moving, we were like, well, should we keep the name Green Gables since we're not going to have Green Gables at our new place? That's kind of weird. But it was just starting to be that people would say, oh, I have a Green Gables goat, and so I'm like, well, I think we'll stick with the name because that's getting to be known, and so we kind of just stuck with that, and now that's.
So did you paint anything?
We still
Did you
are.
paint your gables green at the new house? No.
No, we have a hip roof on the farm now.
Okay.
So, although it is a green roof, so maybe
Okay.
that counts.
There you go. There you go.
And we have a green hoop barn, so there's plenty of green.
So, do you think I know just being in it for the short time, I'm just the whole pandemic, I think I really saw a bloom in, more and more people wanting to purchase goats and wanting to get on the wait list. Did you see that as well in the last couple of years?
Oh, I could have sold my whole herd twice, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
We had so many people wanting milkers, people wanting kids, everything. And it was like, well, I don't want to sell everybody, but it would have been pretty easy to do, I think.
Yeah.
But it does, it really pushed people to kind of think about where they're going to get their milk from if they can't get it from the grocery store. Same thing with chickens and eggs and all of that. So I do think that kind of gave people, especially people who've been thinking about maybe doing something, kind of gave them a push to say, ooh, if I want to do this, I got to do it.
Mm-hmm. I'm hoping that through just, educational things, not like the podcast that we're doing right now, that we'll be able to prevent, I guess, kind of like that burnout, because I think there's a number that's thrown around.
Yes.
Like most goat people stay in it for like 3 to
Yep.
5 years, and then they realize,
Yep.
oh
Well,
gosh, they have to be fed every day, twice a
yes.
day, milked twice a
Yep.
day,
Yep.
and it's hard to get chore
Yep.
help and things like that. And so,
Right.
we
Well,
want to.
I've helped a lot of new breeders over the years, and I've seen a lot that only lasted for a couple of years, and a lot that continued on. But one thing that I always tell people is to start small. Don't get 12 goats your first year, because you need to start with maybe 1 or 2 or 3 kidding in a year at the most. Don't go bigger than that, because you need to get used to it, understand how things work. And when you have some sort of health thing with your herd, you have 3 or 4, maybe 5 goats to treat. But if you have something that goes through your herd and you're trying to treat 20 goats, you're going to get burned out really fast.
Yep.
And so just kind of those learning curves, because we all make mistakes, and when we're starting, we make more mistakes. So it's easier to learn with fewer than more. So I definitely encourage people to start small and see if it's something that they like before they buy a whole big herd.
Yeah, that's definitely some good advice, because I've seen buyers, I think most of uh, my friends, they did start small, but then you kind of, you're the same boat you're in. You're like, okay, oh, I want to keep that doing. Oh, I need to keep that one to see how that looks like. And then you're like, okay, I can't do, you have to, you kind of be like, okay, this is my
Yeah.
number, this is it. So,
Yeah,
well,
I think that is one really hard thing about breeding goats, rather than just keeping goats for milk, where you sell the kids every year, or you send them to the butcher, or whatever your practice is. If you're breeding towards a goal, and you have to keep kids in order to make progress, then that means you usually have to let some of your older does go. And for me, that is the hardest, is letting
Yes.
the milkers go.
Yes.
I mean, they were the best of that year's kid crop that you kept, and then they were good enough for their first freshening to stay with you. And I kind of, the more you go, the harder it is to sell. And then you have a bond with them more than kids than you do with a
Yeah,
little kid.
I
At least for
just
me,
I just parted
it's
with
hard.
one of my first my first baby, then my first doeling, and she was actually a out of one of yours, out of Dash. I think it was Dash of Freedom. I think you do you
Uh
have
huh.
him? I'm not sure if you have him back or how old he is now, but um, her name was Pixie, and I swear that goat could scream my name like Carrie, like she could speak. But I was
Oh,
just
that's funny.
I had kept some things out of her, and I was just okay. Like I wanted to bring in these other Nubians, and I'm just like, okay, I have to part with her. And I found this lovely, lovely farm, and they're taking great care of her. But it's hard, when
It is.
because like you said, the personalities, it's really, you kind of have to, I don't know,
Yeah.
you have to put on that lifestyle. I need to make these tough decisions, not, but they all have such personalities. It's hard. So
Right. Yep. That's why it is nice when we find such really good homes for them and not have to, wonder about where they're going to be.
where they
But
ended up.
I
Yeah.
have had so many just wonderful people that I've met through the goats, and some of them are my best friends today, that I never would have met if it weren't for the goats. So,
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about kind of the present state of the mini Nubians. What share with us, what do you think, kind of what does the future hold for mini Nubians, or where would you like to see the future go with all of the mini Nubians that are across the country?
well, I see kind of two things. I think we're going to continue to see, um, well, I think we'll always have the people that are, you know, more of a, I don't know, pet minded breeders, that
Mm-hmm.
are in it because of those wonderful personalities and the size that's fun and all of that, but they have no interest in milking. That's not what they're in it for. They like the amazing colors that they can come in, and the eye color and all of that. That's so fun about these goats. So I see that there are people that do it more of a pet style breeding. Um, I think we'll always have those um, breeders, and then there's also people that are in it for milk for their family or showing, or just trying to improve the breed, as a whole. Um, and that's been kind of more, what my connections have been on that side of it. Although I do have people that buy specialty wethers for pets.
Mm-hmm.
But I like, I'm really excited to see how many people are milk testing. Just this last year, the numbers of people that are on milk test has just skyrocketed. And I'm just so excited to see that, because for the longest time, it was like, I think I was one of like 5 breeders that was milk testing. It's like, it's kind of hard to collect data when you only have 5 herds that are
Yeah.
doing it.
Yeah.
So it's really exciting to me to see people getting into milk testing, that there are more shows. The virtual shows just exploded with how many people are showing their goats in that. And, I'm hopeful that someday we'll have something similar to ADGA's LA program, their linear appraisal. That would be really exciting. It's really complicated. I worked on the committee for that for a while with MDGA, but it's not an easy task, let's put it that way. So, and getting, everybody on the same page is always a interesting challenge as well. Um, but I think there's a lot of neat potential. And one other thing I'm really excited to see is a lot of new blood being brought in, with
Mm-hmm.
people, using high quality Nubians and high quality Nigerians, to bring in new bloodlines into the breed, because we can't just stick with the handful that got started 20 years ago.
Yeah, that's kind of,
So
not here to just talk about my herd or anything, but I see a lot of people doing it. They might have some like I've got a couple goats that are sixth and seventh generation that were from kind of my starter goats. And then I really like the Nubians. And so I've been
Mhm.
trying to bring in some fresh Nubian blood and kind of blending that back. But
Mhm.
I am not a big fan of Nigerian. So I don't want to
Mhm.
have any Nigerian bucks. I don't. So I'm just kind of playing with those experimental generations with those higher percentage of Nubian. So that's
Mhm.
it's fun to
Yeah.
have see how those cross with kind of maybe a fourth or fifth, a generation mini Nubian that's
Mhm.
got your bloodline. It's got bloodlines from a lot of different folks, but it's interesting to
Right.
see.
Well, and that's the thing. Sometimes people um, are kind of surprised to find out that after having mini Nubians for 22 years, I only have a couple of purebreds in my herd, and I still have first generations and second generations and all of that. And I'm like, well, that's because that doesn't matter that much to me. It matters
Mm-hmm.
about the quality, the milk production, the ease of milking, the hardiness. I want a goat that I don't have to be out there worming every couple weeks. you know,
Yeah.
um, I don't want goats that I have to trim their hooves every 3 weeks or they can't walk. I want good, strong, healthy, hardy animals that have correct conformation that give me lots of milk for very little input. And so I, while I obviously will, the generations happen eventually, I don't look at that when I'm making
Mm-hmm.
my breeding choices. I choose, like I said earlier, about which traits I want to improve on the goat. And sometimes that makes the kids be sixth generation. Sometimes I'll breed my fifth generation doe back to a second generation buck because he's the right match for her. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just kind of a fun thing to
And I
see
think and
how.
I think that's the learning curve. And I'm going to keep mentioning this in every single podcast because that's the thing with generations. And I told this story last time, but when I was first like, oh, mini Nubians, that's cool. You're like, oh, what are these generations? Oh, okay. Well, there's purebred. Well, purebred, that must be the best. And that like
Right.
when you don't know what you don't know, that kind of makes sense,
Right.
right? And so
Mhm.
then that's kind of so we'll keep repeating it, folks, until you just get if you get
Yep.
tired of hearing it, just send me a message and tell us to stop. But it's really quality over that quantitative
Yep.
generation number.
Well, and usually when I have a buyer that contacts me and they want to put a deposit down on a kid and they say they want, XYZ generation, I usually will ask them, you know, um, what it is about that generation that they're looking for or why it is that they want a specific generation. And, usually people are asking me for a sixth or seventh or whatever generation, but sometimes it's a first generation or second generation. And so I just want them to tell me, get talking, why they
Mm-hmm.
want that. And then I can help them know if that's really actually, because a lot of times there's misconceptions about it. I want a purebred because they have better breed character. And I'm like, or sixth generation, I should say, because they have better breed character. I'm like, well,
Nope.
that's not actually true. I mean, some do, some don't. so I remember when I went to pick up some of Charlie Brown's relatives that I got. I went to visit another mini Nubian farm that was down there, and they had like, oh boy, I don't know, probably 30, 40 goats, all mini Nubians. And she was so excited and happy to show me her sixth generation and seventh generation goats. And I mean, this was a long time ago. I didn't even know they had that many when that was probably maybe 18 years ago.
Wow.
And I was kind of surprised, but I was also appalled because they had just the most horrific top lines and udders that were like swinging in the breeze.
Yeah. No
Just, I was
attachment.
like, oh
Yeah.
my, okay, I don't, that was a good wake up call for me. That generation meant nothing. It's like you can have, a amazing goat that's a purebred, or you can have a goat that's not so great that's a purebred. And the number on that registration doesn't really indicate quality, is
Yeah.
I guess the
Yeah.
main thing there. But
And I had a
you can
good
have good
take.
quality in any generation.
Yeah, I had a good takeaway from the TMGR podcast with Amy Parker. She was talking about, really the percentages. And when you talk about percentages, really her point was the only percentage once you start blending that you truly know is that for if you do the Nigerian buck to a Nubian doe, then you know it's 50%, 50-50. But after that, you don't really know how those genes are expressed. So we can put that percentage on the registration certificate, but it might not totally mean, that,
Right, depending
70.
on what gene they got from,
Yes.
which gene they got from each parent.
Yes. So that, and
Yeah.
that's, that was interesting because I'd never really thought of it that way.
Which would explain why sometimes you get bucks that are higher generation that are huge.
Yeah.
Like I know some people that came to visit our farm from the West Coast, and they were just amazed at the size of our bucks. They're like, they're so little. I mean, I don't think they're so little, but compared to the bucks they were used to seeing, they were so little.
Mm-hmm.
So it's fun. Like, it definitely, genetics are a fun thing to learn about and experiment with.
That's a good podcast topic. We could talk about genetics and how they're expressed. And there's a lot of good information on. I actually took a breeding course for dogs, an AKC program that had a whole genetics course. It's free online. So we'll have that maybe in the resources episode if you guys want to listen to that. It has been just a pleasure talking to you today. I guess let's just open it up for any last minute comments or funny story or anything you want to share.
Sure. I guess I'll end with some advice. I would encourage people to ask lots of questions. And if you do have the opportunity to go to a show, whether that's a mini show or a standard show, go watch and listen and learn. Seeing goats hands-on and getting your hands on some of those goats can teach you a lot more than just looking at pictures. Pictures are great, but seeing them in person on the move and touching goats, there are things you can't see in a picture very well, like skin texture and the bones and all of that are a lot harder to see than to feel. That, and if you can find an ADGA breeder that's having a linear appraisal session that they will let you attend and just watch, you can learn so much from those. So that's those two things, or I guess that's three things, are really good learning tools.
I'm excited. So I don't think I've told listeners this, but I'm going to be attending the AGDA convention in Tucson, and I'm actually auditing the linear appraisal course. It's an all-day course. So
very nice. I did that. When was that? A few years ago, 4 years ago, I guess I did that, and I learned a lot. It was very helpful. I would love to do it again a bunch of times.
Well, I think convention is going to be in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which would be like, I guess, kind of south. I don't know how far south that would be from you. But that one's going to be pretty close. This one here in Tucson will take me about, I think it'll be a 2-day trip to get there. We're going to try to make it back in one day, but definitely 12, 13 hours. So, but within driving distance. So us goat folks, we like to drive. We don't like to fly anywhere. So
right. Anything's within driving distance as long as you don't have to go across the ocean, right?
Yes. Yes, you can always get there. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for all the sage wisdom and just sharing your history and your experience and just the advice. And hopefully all of our listeners will really enjoy this episode. Tell us, Eliya, where can we find more information about you and your farm? Do you have a Facebook page or a website?
Our website is Green Gables Mini Nubians.com. That's where you can see all of our goats. I have a lot of articles posted on there, information on how to breed mini Nubians and what all the numbers about percentages and generations and all that, what it's talking about. So there's a lot of information on there too if you look under goat keeping articles. So
yes,
lots of things to poke around. And I have pretty much, you go to our reference does and bucks pages, it goes back to the beginning of our herd. So you can kind of have fun seeing the progression through there of our herd. So
And it is an
been a
awesome
pleasure.
website. So if you need to design your own website, look at Eliya's website and mimic it because it has so much information on it about each of the goats. So really helpful when doing
Oh,
research and pedigree research since so many of our mini Nubians go back to your wonderful herd. So we appreciate you breeding quality goats and building better goats and promoting the goat, all of the goat things that you do. We appreciate it.
well, thank you for having me on the podcast. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Well, thanks, goat friends. I'll be at the AGDA convention next week, so we'll probably have an episode after that, just kind of maybe sharing some fun things that I learned, and we'll go from there. So you guys take care. Happy goating. Hey guys, thank you so much for listening to the Mini Dairy Goat podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast for our new episodes. Share the podcast, tell all your goat friends about us, rate and review the podcast, and also you can hit us up on our Facebook page, Mini Dairy Goat Podcast, for more information and show notes. Thank you so much and happy goating.